This is a presentation on the 5-paragraph essay, and for most of us this should be a refresher because the 5-paragraph essay model is a format that we've used probably since grammar school, and we took it with us into high school, and now you're moving forward into college. And it will become useful to you, but as you advance in your classes and your writing abilities, you will probably outgrow this format. But I want to talk about it because it still holds the basic formula for essential writing and good skills. The 5-paragraph essay, as I said, it's a basic formula for writing small essays, and small essays and papers are probably what you've done the most of throughout your writing career. However, if you think about articles you read now, newspapers, journal articles, essays, books, none of those are written in 5 paragraphs. They are many more paragraphs than that. And the reason for that is because you want something more developed, a little bit more advanced. So you have to outgrow that 5-paragraph essay model, and that's why I call it a training wheels version, because it's the starter kit. These are the basic components of good paper, good essays, and all these components can be used and applied when we move into more advanced forms of writing. So this isn't the best model that we use when we write at the college level or higher in most cases. As you grow out of your English 101 or 1101 class, you'll probably move beyond this 5-paragraph model. However, it's still the best format to use when you have a timed writing assignment or you're taking a final exam. It's very succinct, to the point, direct, and in a time crunch, it's the best model to use, and it's the one that we're most comfortable with. Even if we're trying to write a larger essay that's going to be more than 5 paragraphs, we can always start with the 5-paragraph essay model or components of it and just enhance it as we keep revising it. So that's why I want to discuss it today and go back over it just to make sure that everybody knows the basic components. Now, what are the 5 paragraphs? Well, the beginning is the introduction. You have introductory paragraph, and the last sentence of that paragraph most often will be your thesis statement. Once you have your thesis statement, you move to your 3 body paragraphs. Each of those body paragraphs begin with effective topic sentences. Then you'll have strong evidence and support that backs up what's being said in the sentence. And then you'll have a clear explanation of how and or why the paragraph's information supports the thesis statement. That's something that's very essential in each paragraph, to explain how the information in the paragraph relates back to the thesis. You finally have a conclusion paragraph, and a lot of people will say that the conclusion simply restates the thesis. That's not exactly true. If all you do is just restate your thesis statement, what was the point of writing the essay to begin with? If all you're going to do is acknowledge the very first paragraph you wrote and the last paragraph you wrote. You want to do something that acknowledges all the information that you provided. There needs to be a reason that you've written all this information. Why would someone want to read it? Why would someone need this information? What makes it valuable? So the conclusion paragraph, it should reiterate your thesis statement, but it has to go beyond just a simple restating of it. And you want to try to answer the following questions. So what? In other words, why does your essay matter? Who cares? If you're thinking about your audience, if your paper's audience driven, then you need to figure out a way to bring your audience in. Let the audience know what it's supposed to do. What is the audience role now that they've read this essay? And why should they care? And then that's kind of figured out through the course of writing that and explaining to them what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to take the information that you've provided. When we look at introductions, sometimes a lot of people have difficulty beginning an introduction or beginning an essay and writing an introduction. Don't take an approach to an essay by thinking that you have to write from beginning to end. A lot of times people don't have an introduction ready, or they don't have a thesis statement. They just have a general idea of what they want to write. That's okay. You can always start writing your body paragraphs first. There's no law that says you have to write an essay in a certain way. When you finish it, it has to look a certain way, but the writing components can come to you in various methods, in various ways. And sometimes I find students who end up writing the entire essay and they get down to the conclusion, and it turns out that the conclusion has the components that the introduction should have. It even includes the thesis statement. And I often say, move your conclusion up and make that your introduction, and then write a new conclusion. So it's just variable. It's just however you write, whatever you're most comfortable with. But when you're writing an introduction, one thing you should avoid, you never want to be too generalized. We always tell students, when you write introductions, you want to start broad and then move down to a more specific format for your thesis statement. That's a standard way of writing the introduction. However, if you start too broadly, or if something's too generalized, you're going to run into trouble. For example, if I'm writing an essay where I'm examining the characters in the book The Great Gatsby, if the focus is the characters within The Great Gatsby, my introduction doesn't need to be so generalized as to discuss the whole writing career or biography of the author F. Scott Fitzgerald. That would be unnecessary. There's no relationship there. It also, another example would be if I'm going to write an essay where I believe we need a new public transportation system in our city, I wouldn't begin the essay with a whole history report of the city in general. You want to have things that are relative. You want the components to match. The thing that an introduction needs to do is it needs to establish the writer's credibility and set a general tone for the piece. This is where you lay out the groundwork for what your argument's going to become. You move your introduction into your thesis statement because you want to identify some central claims within your essay. You don't want to point out every single item that you're going to cover. You don't want to defend elements of your paper in the introduction. You merely want to suggest or imply what's coming ahead. What's the need for this paper? Why is there a reason for it? You have to sort of create a reason for the paper to be written. Now, your introduction should always bear that direct relationship to the thesis statement. Just because they're tangentially related does not mean that they are related enough to be included in your introduction. If you have information, like I said, if I'm writing on the characters, if I'm writing about Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald's writing career would have nothing to do with that. Even though he wrote the book, those two things aren't related. There's not a close enough relationship for that to be written. So always make sure there's a relationship between the introduction and your thesis statement. Here are some possible ways to begin. I know you always want to have sort of that narrative hook. No matter what you're doing, you want to have something that pulls your reader in, draws the reader in, attracts the audience. Here are some ways to begin, and here are some ways to build an introduction. You may want to use an illustrative anecdote, and that's just, you may want to tell a story that presents the problem or presents the issue that you're going to address with your thesis. You could have just a very strong opinion that you present and you want to defend. You may have a pertinent or startling statistic. Some statistical information that will really shock or wow your audience and really pull them in to make them interested or make them concerned about the topic. You may have an unusual fact or a vivid example that will do that. You might want to ask a question, like a research question. However, I always caution people with questions in an essay, because when you ask questions, you're losing some credibility. If you ask too many, then you're giving all of your authority away to someone else. Because if you're the writer, you should establish your own authority within the text, within the writing. If all you do is ask questions to someone else, that's giving up your power. That's asking someone else, well, what do you think? What do you want to do? What's your concern? In an essay like this, you should be telling someone, you should be demonstrating to someone why your view, your belief, your opinion is the correct one, or at least one that has validity. So be very judicious with your questions. Okay, you don't want to lose credibility that way. You may also want to use an appropriate analogy that sheds light on your claim, or you may want to give a definition that you go on to refine or elaborate upon. Now, when we define terms in an essay, you don't want to define terms that are easily definable. Think about more abstract terms if you're working towards definitions. Definitions like to define loyalty. How would you define patriotism? Think of words like that. How can love be defined more specifically within your essay? These are terms that are harder to really put an exact wording beside to say this is what it means. And never, ever, ever put in an essay, according to Webster's dictionary, this word means blah, 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 blah. You never want to quote from a dictionary. You're writing to, you're supposed to be writing to fellow writers or an audience that's sophisticated enough to know a general definition of a word. Now, if you're writing to small children or kindergartners who wouldn't understand the term, if that's your audience, then you may need to do that. But for adult audiences, you should assume that they have a basic understanding of most words that you're going to put forth, unless they're very unusual words that you, like I said, with abstract terms that you should define. And going back to the question for a second, never ask a question in your essay that can be immediately answered with yes or no. If you need to word it that way, if it can be worded where the answer can immediately follow as yes or no, reword your statement so that it isn't a question, so that you actually state the positive or the negative. And lastly, a quote, you could open with a quote from an expert on your topic that sets the tone for your essay. Now, the quote should come from someone who is a professional in the field, not someone that you just pulled out from Bartleby.com or some quote warehouse online, or you just pulled something from thin air and want to throw a quote in just to make you look like you did some research. Always be certain of the person that you're using and make sure that person is an expert in the field that you're talking about. Okay, because the quote will set the tone for your essay. It's going to sort of be modeled after what you've written here, but make sure you know enough about the person to feel comfortable using that person with the information that you're about to provide. Don't just pull it from a quote warehouse. When we write our thesis statements, the thesis statement is our contract with our audience. It's something that whatever I say in my thesis statement is what an audience is expecting me to come through with the writing of the essay, through the body paragraphs. So make sure that your contract is intact. If what you've written in your thesis statement doesn't match the body of your essay, then you may need to look at your body essay and go back and revise your thesis statement accordingly. The thesis should not be a statement of fact, and it should not offer general information that's immediately obvious or generally accepted. If it's a statement of fact, why would you need to write an entire paper on it if it's just a statement of fact? It needs to be more argumentative in nature. And here are some poorly written thesis statements. Sacramento is the capital of California. Well, yes, everyone knows Sacramento is the capital of California. That's a fact. It's generally accepted. How can we write 5 paragraphs? How can we write 1 paragraph on that? The sentence sums up the entire idea. There's nothing to defend or argue or support. Americans must pay federal income tax. This is another one. It's a fact. If you live in the United States, you have to pay federal income tax. That's a requirement. So there's no wiggle room for you. There's nothing to really argue. It's just a statement of fact. There's no point of writing that. What you should do with a thesis statement is make it an argumentative point that your essay is going to uphold, support, defend, prove, throughout the course of the writing. So it needs to have some edge to it, some opinion. It needs to have an opinion backing to it, or be based in an opinion. And here's some examples. Rather than the Sacramento as the capital of California, that's a fact. What if I said Los Angeles should be made the capital of California? That's argumentative. It's not obviously an obvious fact, or it's not generally accepted, because I'm arguing that I think instead of Sacramento, Los Angeles should now be made the capital of California, and my essay will explain the reasons why. Americans should not have to pay federal income tax. Well, since they do, maybe my argument is that here are the reasons why I don't think they should have to pay that anymore, and the rest of my paper can be compelling enough to defend that topic or support it. So those are more argumentative directions. And like I said earlier, as a general rule of thumb, most strong thesis statements begin as an opinion. And then what happens is you develop information, you obtain research to help support that idea and give it a little more weight. Now, there are 2 types of thesis statements, closed versus opened, and you may not be aware of this. You might not have heard this before. Most of you are probably more familiar with the closed thesis statement because it's more typical in the 5-paragraph essay. It's also something that people might call a 3-pronged thesis. And what that means is that you have all 3 points that are based in your thesis statement. So look at this thesis statement that's a closed thesis. Jane is a bad student because she arrives late to class, never takes notes, and refuses to do her homework. And you see how we've built each prong becomes the topic of one of the body paragraphs. We have the prongs in there. She arrives late to class. She never takes notes. She refuses to do her homework. And then we pull each of those out. And that first little point becomes paragraph 1. The second little point becomes paragraph 2. The third little point becomes paragraph 3. And that's what we focus on. But, we really want to go beyond that or do something more than that. And sometimes this is the most simplified version, and it's okay to write, but as you become a better writer, as you become more advanced in your writing skills, always try to move beyond that, okay? Because this format is very limiting. It's going to be a very limiting format for you to look at. What you may want to consider is an open thesis as opposed to the closed thesis, because an open thesis will allow more flexibility. It gives you more opportunity to expand what you're writing, and it's especially helpful if you're trying to write beyond a 5-paragraph essay. If you want to have, if you need 10 paragraphs or you need many more paragraphs. The open thesis, it offers an umbrella statement under which all the paragraph points might fall, but it doesn't pinpoint exactly what each paragraph is going to be about. It doesn't have those 3 prongs. So the closed thesis we looked at before, Jane is a bad student because she arrives late to class, never takes notes, and refuses to do her homework. If I were going to just make that an open thesis statement, I could just write Jane is a bad student. That's opinion. That's rooted in some argumentative point that the rest of my essay can defend or support. And I can add additional points. I don't have to just rely on those, the fact that she arrives late to class, she never takes notes, she refuses to do her homework. I can move beyond those points if I need to, and I don't have to feel restricted into making each point about one paragraph. Because sometimes you may have a point that you need 3 paragraphs to describe. Maybe it will take me 3 paragraphs for the reason that she arrives late to class, and some of the other ones might take 1, 2. It's you're not sure, or maybe you have 20 points that need to be addressed. So this umbrella statement allows you to put all that in there. Now, after we've moved on past the introduction and the thesis statement, then we move into our body paragraphs. And every body paragraph we write needs to include a clearly stated topic sentence. Now, the topic sentence is the first sentence in the paragraph. It needs to bear a direct relationship to the thesis statement. In other words, you're going to have a topic sentence that's going to have an argumentative point. It's going to have sort of an opinion based in it, but the opinion is linked to that thesis statement. The thesis statement is the big statement. The topic sentence is sort of a sub-argument or a sub-point that relates to the thesis, because the more you prove with every topic sentence you uphold and support, it will in turn support the thesis statement. Oftentimes, and most frequently, the topic sentence, it will need to include a transition word or phrase that links it to the prior paragraph. Because remember, we want to write essays that have a nice flow, if you've heard that term used often in your classes. But you want things to transition well. You want it to move from paragraph to paragraph with a seamless transition. You don't want it to look like I wrote, here's one block of my paragraph, and then everything stopped. Now I'm going to write a whole new block of the paragraph on a whole new topic. There needs to be a connection between each paragraph. Every sentence has a connection between it from one sentence to the next. Every paragraph has a transition or a connection from one paragraph to the next. That's how we have paragraph unity and paragraph coherence. You want everything to cohere, to look like it matches up. After you've written a good topic sentence, then you provide specific evidence and support, and that either comes through your personal experience, or it may come from a documented source that you found, or the research that you've performed that supports the claim that you're making in that topic sentence. And finally, you'll have a concluding sentence or statement, and that's going to wrap up the paragraph by demonstrating how and or why the information supports the thesis statement. If you think about the specific evidence and support, it's going to go back to support and defend your topic sentence. But once you've done that and explained why the topic sentence is justified, then you need one final sentence or statement that sort of sums and ties everything up from that paragraph to show how all of this information in turn supports or defends your thesis. Here's some examples. If you have the topic sentence, to show how the topic sentence should bear a direct relationship to the thesis is going to express an argumentative point. The first topic sentence of the first paragraph will be the first subpoint that supports the thesis. Then the second topic sentence will be the second subpoint. The third sentence the third topic sentence, which will be in paragraph 3, will be the third subpoint, and it'll so forth and so on if you have more paragraphs. Here's an example. Say my thesis statement is, our city needs to improve its public transportation. Okay, it's argumentative. It's an opinion that I have that I want to express. So my first topic sentence might be, our outdated public transportation system does not meet the demands of our population adequately. And that could be an opinionated statement. Now, I may have some facts that support what I have to say there, but other people in the area may disagree and think we have a perfect public transportation system. So that first paragraph will in turn defend that singular idea of presenting evidence of why the transportation system doesn't meet the demands of our population. But do you see how that statement goes back and ties into the overall argument that we need to improve our public transportation? And then after I've defended that paragraph and supported it, my next topic sentence that will go in the second paragraph would be, expanding the current public transportation system would allow it to serve all areas of our community. Then I can move forward with that and explain. But you see how there's still a relationship to the thesis statement. Topic sentence 3, more citizens would use public transportation if it were more reliable. Another opinionated statement, another statement that has to be justified or supported, and yet it still relates back all to that thesis statement of the city needing to improve its public transportation. Now note, once I write all these sentences, even though that's the base sentence that I have, I'm probably going to have to tweak it a little bit and add transitions to it so that it connects with all the paragraphs that come before it and after it, or the sentence before it to the next sentence, the last sentence of the paragraph before it into that sentence, which leads off the new paragraph. So transitions are important. When we write our conclusion, we want to do more than summarize the main points of the essay. You know, if all we do is summarize the main points, that's a good starting point, but there needs to be a purpose. If we've thought about who our audience is and who we're writing to, then we need to figure out a way to motivate them to take this information and use it in some way, do something with it. Okay, and in the conclusion, you need to explain why your essay or argument is important. What makes this information valuable? Why should I pay attention to it? You need to demonstrate why your idea matters within that conclusion. You know, think about, you've written all this, you've had an audience follow you through it. Now, what do they do with the information? How are they supposed to take it? Why am I supposed to feel like this was an important read for me? Possible conclusion styles that you may want to consider. The synthesis format. A synthesis conclusion shows the readers how all the points fit together in a cohesive whole. Now, that goes beyond summarizing, because now you're going to show how all these components come together, and if we do all of these things, here's going to be the end result. You also can make a proposal, and that suggests a course of action, a solution to correct or modify the behavior. And this is easy if we're writing a call to action paper. You know, and if the example that I gave you of needing the public transportation system, that could be considered a call to action paper in a way. I'm going to show you how dire, how problematic our current system is. We need something new, and that makes it easier for us if we want to do this proposal format, because in the conclusion we can just put a call to action. Here's what you need to do. You know, call your Congress members, call your senators, you know, call your local public transportation authority and talk to them. That would be a good example of that proposal. Another one is an anecdotal conclusion, and we talked about anecdotes for an introduction, but they can also be used for the conclusion, because we can provide an anecdote that illustrates our thesis statement or shows specific examples of the point I'm trying to make. You know, after we've gone through all these details, then I may use an example to sort of emphasize the importance of what I've said. You know, if we do this, then this may become the problem, or this may not. We can avoid this problem. A conclusion at minimum should reiterate your thesis, and it should answer those questions I mentioned earlier. So what? Why your essay matters? Who cares? It identifies or implies the audience upon which your purpose focuses. Now, that doesn't mean you have to say in the conclusion, my audience should be these people. It just means that you know who the audience is, and you know from that, you know how to address them, how to pull at their emotions, how to show them the credibility that you needed to have shown in your essay to get them to do what you want them to do. Okay, and that happens often by just explaining why they should care about the topic. It explains why the audience should take note of your essay's argument. So here are some points to remember. The 5-paragraph essay model is not used in more advanced writing, but it can be used as a framework for any essay, and that's because it has the components within it that all essays contain. You know, you have a good introduction, a thesis statement, body paragraphs with all the right components of the body paragraphs, and a good solid conclusion. So this is a framework that you can use for any essay that you're trying to work to write. Thesis statements and topic sentences should express argumentative points and bear a relationship to each other. And conclusions should do more than simply restate the thesis. Now, if you follow this model, you can write a strong 5-paragraph essay or a strong essay that has multiple paragraphs and moves beyond that 5-paragraph model.